What would you do if you discover that your star pilot has been competing with a defective car from the beginning of the season? Well, that was exactly what happened with Lewis Hamilton in Ferrari, and the person responsible for uncovering all this truth was Frédéric Vasseur. After the Austria Grand Prix, while most of the paddock already turned his attention to the next event in Silverstone, something much deeper was brewing in Ferrari's boxes. Apparently, Lewis Hamilton's result had been decent. 4th place, important points without visible errors. But for Frédéric Vasseur, something did not fit. The facial expressions of the British pilot during the debriefing, his body language in park firm, even his tone when speaking with engineers, transmitted an unequivocal sensation of contained frustration. Vasseur, with his surgical experience to read what others do not see, decided to act. First, the brakes. In a category where tenths are decided in each curve, Hamilton had been dealing throughout the race with an anomalous degradation of the rear braking system. The discs showed an irregular wear pattern, which indicated problems in both ventilation and in the thermal brake management. It was no accident that the British had reported on the radio from Tour 5 that he had to begin to keep temperature in the brakes, directly affecting his braking aggressiveness and the possibility of executing overtaking or defending himself effectively. The dramatic thing is that it was not a simple loss of performance. It was a structural limitation, invisible in the data if the pieces were not analyzed with the cold car. And that explains why this anomaly had gone unnoticed by Austria. Second, the balance of the car. What Vasseur found when reviewing the suspensions and differential calibration was a poor correlation between the front and rear train under dynamic load conditions. Under hot track conditions and with high level of graining as occurs in the Red Bull Ring, the SF25 lost rotation capacity in medium curve, generating persistent subwiring. This technical phenomenon caused Hamilton to continually modify its turn point, compromising the ideal line in each lap. In a category where each entrance to curve is measured to the millimeter, that lack of predictability turns the car into an enemy. Vasseur summarized him precisely to his closest circle. It's not that Lewis cannot adapt to the car, is that the car we gave him is sabotaging his performance without him knowing. This statement completely changed the narrative within the Ferrari team. Up to that point, it was thought that Hamilton still did not find confidence, that perhaps his aggressive style did not fit at all with the philosophy of the SF25. But it wasn't a style problem. It was a hardware problem. The contrast between what we saw on Saturday in the classification and what happened on Sunday in the race was not only evident, it was disturbing. Hamilton achieved what many inside and outside the paddock described as their first truly competitive round since Ferrari arrived. 4th on the grid, just a few hundredths from Charles Leclerc. A result that not only surprised but opened doors to tangible hope. Perhaps after all, Hamilton had finally managed to adapt to SF25. However, what happened 24 hours later exposed a more raw truth. What seemed to be a surpassed learning curve was actually an illusion. Because when the race arrived, everything that had worked in classification disappeared under the demands of a long stint, with full fuel load, and under the pressure of managing tires, brakes and energy of the hybrid system. In that context, the car showed its worst face again. The subwiring that in classification had been marginal became the protagonist. The paths Hamilton had memorized to squeeze each curve began to betray it. The SF25 did not respond the same when constancy was required. Worse was the reappearance of the brake problem. While the engineers tried to look for explanations in temperatures, in the pressure of the discs, or even in the distribution of the hydraulic system, Hamilton simply felt that the car did not let it run. The frustration was palpable from the onboard. His paths were clean, his methodical approach. But back after return I lost ground. Not due to errors, but for limitations that not even telemetry could foresee in advance. It was like running a marathon with a half-unleashed shoe. You know that you cannot push with confidence because if you do, you end up on the wall or outside the points. The subsequent analysis confirmed it. The degradation parameters in the Hamilton car were higher than those of Leclerc since Vuelta 8. The aerodynamic load of the rear axle lowered more than expected, forcing a progressive imbalance that required constant manual adjustments in the steering wheel. Engine map change, brake distribution, battery recharge. While Leclerc could focus on running his career, Hamilton had to operate the car as if it were a damaged combat plane. At that level, losing 9 seconds with your teammate is not a defeat. It is a feat of survival. This disparity between Saturday and Sunday also generated questions at the factory. Why a car that performs competitively on a return collapses in a long batch? What margin are there to adjust when the pilot is already surrendering above the technical limitations? And most importantly, how does this affect the long-term project of Ferrari with Hamilton? The answer is clear. As long as this technical dichotomy between classification and career is solved, Ferrari cannot aspire to titles, because the car is not consistent. And in Formula One, the coherence between data, behavior, and result is the basis of success. For Hamilton, the most difficult will not be to find rhythm. The finding of Frédéric Vasseur was not only a technical revelation, it was a turning point. Because once it is shown that a car is not functioning as it should, and even more, that it is not offering the same standard to its two main pilots, the inevitable question is, and now what? For Vasseur, this represents a direct threat to your project. It is not enough to recognize the problem. You have to solve it, and fast. Because Ferrari cannot afford a narrative in which one of its cars works optimally while the other accumulates technical deficiencies that compromise their possibilities from the return one. And when that second car is piloted by Lewis Hamilton, the most laureate pilot in history, the margin of error disappears. The first thing that has been activated in Maranello is a complete review of the assembly process. Vasseur has demanded that SF25 manufacturing procedures be audited, especially in the units for Hamilton. This includes from the alignment of the brakes to the rear suspension calibration, through the distribution of weight in the structural components of the chassis. The objective is not only to correct the error, but to understand why no one detected it before. Because if there is a quality control failure, then there is a structural vulnerability in the organization. And in the modern Formula One, that kind of vulnerability is paid with lost championships. The second front is more subtle but equally delicate, the pilot's psychology. Hamilton is a veteran. He knows what it is to lose, adapt, wait. But he also knows when a team is not delivering what he promises. And while he has shown patience and professionalism where is real, it is no accident that after the race in Austria, his statements have gone from the enthusiasm of the cold tone classification of those who feel something is escaping from his hands. The trust between pilot and team is like a rope. It can be tightened, but if it breaks, there is no way to return to the original version. Vasseur knows it. And that's why he has met with Hamilton personally. Not to ask for explanations, but to offer them. To tell him face to face that Ferrari has identified the problem and that they will not allow it to happen again. Because if this team wants to be champion with Hamilton, you need to build more than a fast car. You need to build a relationship of absolute technical and human symbiosis between your star pilot and your car. Meanwhile, the technical team has started parallel simulations. They are testing alternative brake and suspension combinations, exploring new setup configurations that avoid subviring under conditions of high degradation. It has even been considered to be replicated exactly the configuration of the Leclerc car in the Hamilton garage, to the smallest parameter, to eliminate any error variable. This measure has not only technical value but symbolic. It is a way of telling the world that Ferrari has no first and second category pilots. That Hamilton's car will be, from now on, identical in everything to his partner. There are no excuses. And beyond Ferrari, what happens with Hamilton in the coming weeks will also mark the tone of the entire 2025 season. If the seven-time champion manages to align performance, trust and results, then the championship charges a new dimension. But if the problems persist, if Ferrari fails to recover that coherence between his cars, we will be faced with a repetition of past stories. A plenty of talent, caught in a project that does not finish curdling. What Frédéric Vasseur discovered in Austria is not just another technical failure in the long list of incidents that usually happen in a Formula Team 1. It is a deep symptom of something that goes beyond a manufacturing error or a bad calibration. It is the reminder that even at the highest level of motor racing, where everything is supposed to touch perfection, cracks that end sabotaging dreams, careers, and reputations can be shattered. And in this case, the affected dream is that of Lewis Hamilton, a pilot who did not arrive to Ferrari to spend time. He came because he believed, because he was promised that this would be the project that would allow him to fight for his 8th world championship. He came betting his legacy, his name, his remaining time at the top of the F1. And he did it trusting that the car they would give him would be at least at the height of his talent. Therefore, this finding has a much more transcendental dimension, because now it's not just about repairing a car. It is about recovering credibility, to restore broken confidence, to demonstrate that Ferrari is prepared to manage the pressure it implies having a legend in its ranks. This is not any team. This is the most historical team of motoring. And now it is facing a critical bifurcation. Demonstrate that it has changed, or repeat the mistakes that have moved so many talents of glory under the banner of the rampant Cavallino. But there is also another angle. Because if Ferrari manages to correct the course, if this turning point becomes the beginning of a comeback, then what we are seeing will now be remembered as the exact moment in which everything began to change. And that narrative, that of the Renaissance after the crisis, is what can turn this chapter into the prologue of a larger epic. And you who have followed this whole story here, you have to ask yourself, do you trust that Ferrari will know how to correct this path before it is too late? Do you think Hamilton, at 40, still has the necessary time and faith to wait for the transformation of the team? Or are you seeing live the beginning of the end of an era?